All right, a very, very warm welcome to all of you that have registered for this webinar. My name is Katja Langi. I'll be your moderator for today. I work at HELCOM, which is the Baltic Marine Environment Protection Commission, or Helsinki Commission, or HELCOM for short. We have many names. We're based at the HELCOM Secretariat in Helsinki, Finland. I would love to say that it's a sunny day today, but it is not, I'm afraid. But a warm welcome to you all anyway. We are very excited to see that we received over 200 registrations for this webinar from 53 different countries. So it's really great to see the vast variety of people and nationalities that we will be talking to. Today is the 4th Marine Protected Area Day. And we're excited because for the first time it has left South African shores and has gone international. And before we start with the first speaker, I would like to quickly share a slide of the other activities that will take place today. So should you have some extra time today to join some of the other events that we have planned, then please do so. So I'm going to just share this slide quickly for you so that you can see what those activities and events are. And so after this one, we will be hosting a Twitter chat. So if you are on Twitter, please feel free to join, use the hashtag MPA Day. And just by using that hashtag, you should find the questions that we'll be posing today. And we would love to hear your answers and what you feel about them. So please join us at 12 o'clock Central European Time. And then at 1 o'clock Central European Time, there's a seminar which is hosted by the Institute for Coastal and Marine Research at Nelson Mandela University. And that would be a very interesting talk that you are potentially interested in as well. My colleague Paul, who is in this webinar, he's my trusted co-pilot. He'll be sharing the links and things for these activities so that you can register should you be interested. Then at 2 o'clock Central European Time, we are going on a virtual tour from South Africa to Sweden, which is really exciting. For the first time, we have a Swedish participant, the Baltic representative for MPA Day. And you'll actually get to see some of the MPAs in real time from your couch, and you get to visit lots of different versions of MPAs. So please tune in for that. And that's hosted by Share Screen Africa. Then at 3 o'clock Central European Time, we have another webinar coming up by the Sea Change Project, which is a South African organization. And they are discussing why communities are key for MPAs. And then the last event at 7 o'clock Central European Time, another webinar hosted by LCA Africa, is about marine protected areas and how do we make them work. So please feel free to join any of these events, and we look forward to seeing you at those hopefully later on. All right, but without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Judy Mann-Lang, who I have the pleasure of having worked with for a while in South Africa. And she is based in South Africa in the Eastern Cape. She works for the Two Oceans Aquarium Foundation and is the founder of Marine Protected Area Day. And so Judy will take us off and start the webinar with a background on what MPA Day is and why it's important. Go ahead, Judy.
Thank you so much, Katja, and hello to all of you. Happy MPA Day. It's so exciting to be here and to see our truly global audience and to see how our little day has grown. But where did it all start? I'm going to just tell you a little bit of a story about how Marine Protected Areas Day started, where it came from, and how it's grown. So in actual fact, MPA Day started, the sort of seeds of the idea started way back in 2018. And at that time, our marine science community was ready to proclaim a new 20 marine protected areas. They had done all the research, and it had taken maybe 10 years to do the research, more than 10 years. They had done all the public consultation process. So they had worked really, really hard to ensure that communities understand what was happening with marine protected areas, what these new MPAs were going to be, where they were going to be. There'd been a lot of negotiation to make sure that most people's needs had been accommodated. And they were sort of sitting on the minister's desk. But they were sitting and they were sitting and they were sitting and nothing was happening. And some of the scientists and I chatted together and we said, we really need to get a bit of a groundswell of support for these marine protected areas so that they can be pushed over the line, so that we can proclaim our new 20 marine protected areas. And we started, I was working at that stage at the aquarium in Durban, and we started at that stage to do a bit of research. So we did some research with our visitors, and we asked them a few simple questions. And we were shocked that almost 80% of our visitors could not name one marine protected area in South Africa. So now we've got this scientific community that's ready to have these MPAs proclaimed. We've got all the public consultation process. We're trying to raise awareness about marine protected areas, but we found that most people didn't know what a marine protected area was. So how could we raise awareness about these? How could we expect people to support these amazing nature reserves in the ocean if they've never even heard of them? We can't expect people to support something that they've never heard of, that they don't know exists. And that was where we started to think about this idea of Marine Protected Areas Day. So fast forward in 2019, the 20 new marine protected areas were proclaimed on the 1st of August. It was an amazing achievement. There are very few countries that can achieve going from 0.4% of our exclusive economic zone up to 5% in one move. So it was an amazing achievement for the scientists, for the people who'd been involved in the process, the public community that had been involved, etc., and obviously our government. But then we got the proclaimed, everything was going well. And we started to think, how can we keep communicating? Because just this was not going to be the first and the only step. We needed to really start raising awareness about these protected areas of the ocean and why they're important to people and to nature. So one day in the shower, which is where I have all my good ideas, I thought, we've got Arbor Day, we've got Ocean Day, we've got World Rhino Day, we've got multiple days. In fact, we found over 140 special days that are celebrated around the world. And we thought, why not try Marine Protected Areas Day? So I contacted a few of my friends in the marine communication world in South Africa, and I said, why don't we start MPA Day? And they said, what's MPA Day? And I said, well, I don't really know, but let's figure it out as we go along. So in the middle of COVID, in the middle of lockdown in 2021, a group of us got together, formed a little group of, we called it the MPA Day Alliance, and we got together and we said, let's make this happen. And that was basically how it all started. In the middle of COVID, we couldn't do any activities, so that was where the idea of a virtual tour of the MPAs was formed. It was a terrifying thing. We basically had people around the coast coming to us live on a webinar like this, regardless of the weather and everything else. So we started with that. We started with social media, our website, traditional media. Then obviously in 2022, we started to have activities out in the field, in the various MPAs. And then it's just grown from there. And this year, as Katja said, we're celebrating our 4th Marine Protected Areas Day. Now, I think there are a couple of things to remember with MPA Day. And the first one is this is a celebration with no budget. We do not have a budget for MPA Day, and we haven't had a budget since we started. And I think that is one of the things that's made MPA Day so special, because every single one of our partners has come on board because of their passion for nature and because they care about people. And that, I think, is incredibly special. And I am continually blown away by the enthusiasm of the core team. Many of them have been with us since 2021, like the Two Oceans Aquarium and some others, Flow Communications, OJ Simcox Communications. We've had many partners that have been with us right from the start. Cape Nature, Zimvelo KZN Wildlife. There are a number of groups that have been with us from the beginning, and and they have just kept up the momentum, kept up the enthusiasm. No one's been paid for what they do, and that's something that's quite unique in the world today. As we've grown in this last year, we've been so excited to really go international. Mission Blue, Sylvia Earle's community, they've come on board. The Helcom group have been amazing. They've been so supportive, organizing this webinar and other activities. So we really are starting to grow and become an international group and an international movement. So I think that I'm not going to say much more. All I'm going to say is that Marine Protected Areas Day is on the 1st of August every year, and it's growing. We're in more than 10 different countries this year, and it is a day to celebrate marine protected areas. It's a day to raise awareness of the importance of marine protected areas for both people and for nature. And it's a day to bring communities together in marine protected areas anywhere in the world, and to help really build support for marine protected areas with communities. So that's what Marine Protected Areas Day is all about. It's a day that's built on soul, it's a day that's built on passion, and it's a day that people do things because they feel it's the right thing to do for their communities and for our ocean. So to everyone who has participated and joined us, I see we've got over 60 people on this webinar. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. Thank you to the two presenters who are coming after me for being prepared to join this webinar as well. Thank you, Helcom team, for organizing it. And I look forward to seeing you on all the other activities that Katja showed you today. And then just good luck to everyone who's doing activities over the weekend. I hope you have good weather. Thanks so much, Katja. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy. That was a lovely introduction to MPA Day. And I must say it's been great to pick this up, and having been in South Africa in 2021 when we started it, it's really lovely to actually be able to now bring it to the European shores and hopefully make it a much bigger event next year, so we can only grow from here. Right, our next presenter is Jannica Haldeen. She is a special advisor at Helcom on marine protected areas, and she's also the project leader and manager of the Protect Baltic project, which aims to increase the protection of the Baltic Sea to 30% by 2030, as we are all trying to desperately do that for all of our oceans. And so I'm going to hand over to Jannica, who will be talking about MPA Day in a Baltic context. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Katja. As Katja already introduced me, I will be brief. My name is Jannica Haldeen, and I'm joining you here from the Baltic Sea, so very, very far away from where Judy is joining you. And here I work as a special advisor on marine protection and biodiversity at Helcom, or the Baltic Sea Environment Protection Commission. And I'm also the project manager for the Protect Baltic project. But in order to talk about why marine protected areas are important, I need to start by providing some context on our relationship with nature and with the sea. And with our relationship, I mean society's relationship with the sea. So the figure that you can see on the screen here illustrates how radically we humans have changed the world over the last 12,000 years. And while 12,000 years might seem like an awfully long time to us, nature has a very long memory, one that is much longer than our own. And our picture of nature at its core is largely defined by our own memories and previous experiences. But this means that collectively, our view of what nature should look like only stretches back one generation, and that picture changes for every generation that passes. This is something that's referred to as shifting baseline syndrome or sliding baseline syndrome. And it's been shown to have a really major impact on our relationship with the world around us. What we see right now, what we're facing, is the legacy of our own past actions, as well as the actions of those that came before us. And while these actions might feel like history to us, it's the reality for our environment and for nature all around us. And because our perspective is so influenced by what we ourselves experience, shifting baselines make it really challenging for us to envision what a healthy and fully functioning ecosystem actually would look like. So because what we are seeing is often a degraded version of nature, or nature that has been impacted by our activities, we can't actually fathom what it would look like if those negative influences would be removed. And because of sliding baselines, we tend to only start reacting when the situation deteriorates at a speed that lets us perceive it firsthand. So when change happens within our lifetime. Now, this is what is happening in many places right now, where we can see these effects on land, so where we live. And this has increased the drive to change societies or humanity's relationship with nature. But we don't think about or necessarily even understand what we can't see or what we can't experience ourselves. In other words, what is under the surface. We don't know what the figure you can see on the screen would actually look like for the marine environment because we simply don't have that information. And this is a problem because lack of information is commonly interpreted as a sign that there is nothing to worry about. But with the marine environment being heavily affected by biodiversity loss and climate change and pollution, the lack of information should be a cause of concern, or in some cases, maybe even a little bit of panic. Because while transformative change might be picking up speed on land, we have a tendency to keep using the marine environment as if it was an unending resource, because we can see kind of how our activities are affecting the world around us on land. We react, but because we cannot see it in the marine environment, we keep using it as if there is no effect. Because the truth is that in a finite world, there are no unending resources. And this brings me here to the Baltic Sea, or my home sea, if you will. The Baltic Sea might, with its very small size and young age and shallow water, seem rather irrelevant on the scale of the global oceans. But besides having a very unique kind of beauty, it can also provide something quite invaluable to other areas because the Baltic Sea can function as a time machine. The Baltic Sea has historically been used as an unending resource, and it's still one of the most heavily used sea areas on the planet. It's affected by climate change at the pace that is much faster than other areas, and so on. So for many aspects, the Baltic Sea has already arrived in a place where most of the global oceans are only heading now. And as a result of several consecutive status assessments for this region, for the Baltic Sea, we know that the situation here is bad. And we also know through these assessments that at the core of this poor status, there is one common denominator, and that denominator is us. But the Baltic Sea can also be a time machine in other ways. It's also one of the most data-rich areas, especially sea areas, on the planet. And the countries here have agreed to come together and jointly do monitoring and share all of their data and take decisions together on what should be done to improve the situation. So while we have a sea that is in poor status, we also have a time machine showing what can be achieved when the countries that share an area come together and actually jointly decide to do something about it. Because the truth is, if we are the problem underpinning the poor status, we can also be the solution for it. And this brings me to the role of marine protected areas here in the Baltic, but of course, this is also applies to other sea areas around the world. Now, marine protected areas have the potential to be islands of hope in this sea of despair, if you will, being areas where we put in place measures to ease all of the pressure that we exert on the ecosystem through our activities. Areas where we leave space for nature to recover, develop, and to function freely. And while the complexities surrounding protected areas can be quite challenging, anyone who works with protected areas, I'm sure will agree. At the heart of it, it really is that simple. If we stop breaking it, it stops breaking. And in fact, with the marine ecosystem or any ecosystem on the planet, if we stop breaking it, not only does it stop breaking, but it actually starts to heal. And this is what the measures taken in marine protected areas this is what they're all about. Possibly the most important thing that the latest status assessment from the Baltic Sea can show us is that when we have the right measures, whether they're inside or outside a protected area, and when we actually implement them, they work. We can see this now. We can see this in the results of the assessments, and we can see it in the data that we have. This proves that marine protected areas and the measures that go with them are viable, fairly low-tech and cost-effective ways to safeguard marine biodiversity and to ensure ecosystem function. So when done right, marine protected areas have been shown to have significant ecological benefits with both more species and more individuals of these species within the area. And with, this by extension translates into economic benefits, for example, spillover effects of fisheries, tourism, and of course into societal well-being, because we are intrinsically linked to the world around us, and our well-being is directly related to the well-being of nature. And an additional benefit is that if we limit the impact from activities that we can control, it leaves the ecosystem space to rebuild and heal. This ecosystem becomes more resilient to then face all of the challenges and pressures that are much harder to control. So we essentially leave more space for the ecosystem to face challenges such as climate change. Now, in relation to what Judy also mentioned in her talk, Jacques Cousteau famously said that people protect what they love, but it is really difficult to love something if you don't even know it exists. So by introducing MPA Day in Europe and starting here in the Baltic, we hope to shine a light on these unique areas all across our seas and let people look both above and below the surface and see the potential that marine protected areas actually have. Because in addition to protecting the habitats and the species within those areas and providing ecosystem functions and services on which we as a society utterly depend for our survival, marine protected areas provide us all with a glimpse into the potential for the beauty and wonder that nature can provide, helping to turn the direction of this sliding baseline. Because through marine protected areas and the work that we're doing in these areas, maybe we can leave the next generation with memories that shape a picture of the sea that is healthier than the one that we see, rather than the opposite. A marine environment that is richer, more diverse, and healing. Because at the end of this sliding baseline, there shouldn't be islands of hope anymore. There should be an ocean of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jannica. That was really a lovely insight into the Baltic context and what I find the most exciting about the Baltic Sea and our aim to protect it is the regional cooperation that we are doing, and I think regional cooperation is probably the way to go in other parts of the world as well. So here's hoping we are going to get a good result by 2030. All right, so now star of the show, Dr. Kirsten Grorud-Colbert. She is a marine ecologist from Oregon State University and a co-creator of the MPA guide that we all want to hear about. So over to you, Kirsten, and thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Katja. Thank you to Judy and to Jannica and to Paul and to all of you for being here. Happy MPA Day. I sit here in Oregon in the US, and here it's just a bit past midnight. So I am officially starting my August 1st with MPAs, which makes me very happy. So I'm going to share my screen and be very grateful for the opportunity today to speak with you about some work that we've been doing related to MPAs, and importantly, these things that Jannica and Judy were both talking about that pulls us together, unites us through MPAs in the ocean, That's really what we're here to talk about today. So thank you for the chance to do that. And I look forward to the discussion that we'll have about these things. So the ocean unites us. 97% of the water on our planet is in the ocean. And just reflecting on what Katja was sharing at the beginning, more than 53 countries represented by those who registered for this webinar. What an incredible thought that each of us sitting in our places are united by the ocean. We have one ocean. And not only does it unite us, but it sustains us. So more than 3.3 billion people around the world rely on the ocean for their primary source of nutrition. We also know that there's more than probably 2.2 million species, multi-celled species alone in the ocean, and likely more than 91% of those have not even been described. So biodiversity is incredible, and it forms really the foundation for all of the services, all of the things that we as people want and need from the ocean. Among that is economies. We know that coral reefs alone, through tourism, contribute more than 11.5 billion US dollars a year in revenue, and that ocean-related activities contribute more than $1.5 trillion to the global economy annually. Beyond that, they unite us in culture and spirit and joy and all the things that we derive and love from the ocean. So we know all those things are crucially important to us as people, to our planet, but we also know that the ocean is facing many, many threats, and they are increasing. Right now, globally, species at risk of extinction or globally threatened in the ocean include 25% of sharks and rays and marine mammals. And populations of large species like tuna have depleted substantially over the last 50 years, such that since 1970, oceanic sharks and rays have been depleted by 71%. Disturbances are continuing, and you see some of them here through coastal development, use of biological resources, pollution, effects of transportation, invasive species, climate change, and these, continue. We know, for example, more than 1 million square kilometers of the ocean floor are subject to bottom trawling every year. So you can think about these impacts and what we're facing. So we know it's the time for solutions, and multiple solutions are needed, right? We need a full toolkit of many different approaches, and these include sustainable fisheries, marine protected areas, which we talk about today. There are also other conserved areas, marine managed areas, and of course, zooming out even, climate mitigation, pollution reduction are going to be crucial for moving forward. And restoration efforts are underway to try and walk back some of these depletions and destructions that we've seen. So today we're going to talk about MPAs, one of my favorite subjects. And part of that is because marine protected areas around the world, they're widely used, established around the globe. They're studied and counted, and they're especially kind of important because they're also looked at in terms of progress on international targets, so policy goals that we have for biodiversity. So, for example, there's a new global target at the United Nations in the Convention on Biological Diversity, and that target is to protect and conserve 30% of the ocean by 2030. That's the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So we're looking to MPAs not only to help with some of these threats that we've talked about, but also to meet targets to stop this wave of change. So let's get on the same page about what an MPA is. And that's because IUCN has a really specific definition that I find really helpful. Of course, it's a clearly defined geographical space. It's protected by legal or other effective means. And importantly, by definition, the primary goal is the conservation of nature. So what an opportunity. We have these areas around the world that are particularly focused on conserving that biodiversity. And they've been established globally. This is from the Protected Planet website, which the UN Environment Programme's World Conservation Monitoring Center facilitates, and they receive all the data from countries around the world about their protected areas on land and in the sea. And so we're really looking at those blue areas, and you can see that they're everywhere. Find your own location. Some of them are quite small, so maybe more like specks on this map, but there are more than 18,000 MPAs around the world as recorded in the database. So it's truly a global tool that provides a global opportunity. Now, we know that MPAs are around the world. We know what they are by definition. And we also know that there are different types of MPAs. And that's because there are different things happening in different places where MPAs exist. So think about where you're sitting right now. Maybe you're near the ocean, maybe you're not. Maybe you've had direct experience with an MPA. Maybe it's your job to work with an MPA. Maybe you've just enjoyed visiting one, but think about all the different things that happen in your area. We started wondering, how do we know what biodiversity outcomes we might expect from any given MPA? Because truly, there's a lot of investment going into these areas. There's an incredible potential for hope and for forward movement, but how do we make sure that what we're doing in MPAs really works towards that goal? So what I'm here to share with you today is on behalf of many, many people in a global working group that joined together to try and answer this question. What can we expect from different types of MPAs? And the goal was to evaluate the state of the science and local knowledge about MPAs. And we gathered together in multiple different fora. We looked at research across many different species, across different habitats as well, truly around the world, looking at the data and the other forms of evidence that were available, both inside and outside MPAs. And then we also worked with different communities in different places with their own local and traditional knowledge about how areas have changed over time and how different types of approaches to biodiversity conservation have been successful or have been met with challenges. So what we found is that science and other forms of knowledge can tell us what it means to protect inside an MPA. And that's really an important question if we're asking, how much have we protected? Where are we headed with this protection? And then it can also help us answer when an MPA is protected. How do we know when an MPA can be counted as working towards its goals and in some cases contributing to global targets? And then finally, how can we establish MPAs that are effective? We want them to be able to achieve that biodiversity conservation and also benefits for communities. Our narrative is intertwined with the ocean, and it's important to consider those social benefits and effects as well. So what we found is encapsulated in this paper, and that QR code will take you directly to the behind the paywall version of the paper in Science. And there are very many co-authors. We've got 42. And at the bottom, I just want to draw your attention to the founding partners of the MPA Guide. And these are folks around the world who are helping to contribute to the tracking of how much of the ocean is protected. Right now, Protected Planet, with that map that I showed you, shows about 8.26% of the ocean is protected in any kind of MPA. So UNEP and WCMC are founding partners of the MPA Guide. IUCN and the World Commission on Protected Areas, Marine, National Geographic, Pristine Seas, our group at OSU in the States, the Protected Planet Report, which will be coming out this fall, the latest version with the most up-to-date tracking of how much of the ocean is protected, and then the Marine Conservation Institute's MPA Atlas. So what did we find? What the MPA guide boils down to is a way that we can think simply about different kinds of MPAs around the world and how likely they are to achieve the outcomes for biodiversity conservation. So there's really 4 specific elements of the MPA guide. The first is the stage of establishment. The second is the level of protection. The third is the enabling conditions. And the fourth is the social and ecological outcomes that are connected with all of these. So I'll take a moment to go through each of these. Okay, the stage of establishment basically works from this idea that there's multiple steps in the journey to create an MPA. So in the case of this journey, you can think about, for example, the beginning, when a site is proposed or committed. And this is when we have, for example, a government or another body that kind of puts forward the idea to create an MPA, but nothing is kind of active on the water yet. And designated is the stage where an MPA is established or recognized through legal or traditional means. So we might say it's active on paper or other forms of making that official, but it's not necessarily active in the water yet. That happens during the implemented stage. When an MPA is acknowledged to be in force, it's active on the water, people know that regulations exist and to comply with them. And then finally, actively managed, which is really the direction that all MPAs are headed towards: ongoing monitoring, active engagement, enforcement, and all the things that help to sustain an MPA's success over time. So where this becomes really helpful is that when we're looking globally, for various reasons, some MPAs may be in one or other of these stages. So it helps us know that an MPA is protected when it's implemented and actively managed, because that's when it's active in the water. So we might think of that as a way to compare what's active and what may not be active yet for whatever reason in our accounting of how much of the ocean is protected, for example. The next is level of protection. And the idea behind this is that because there are many different types of MPAs, there's also many different types of activities that are taking place within them. And those activities will have different outcomes for biodiversity depending on what they are. So we might think, for example, for the fact that there are some MPAs in the world where extensive extraction and other impacts are actually happening. We would call those minimally protected for that reason. But as we think about activities happening that are lower impact, they may be lightly protected, they may be highly protected. For example, if the impact is so light that impacts are minimized to the extent possible, and then to fully protected, where these areas don't have any extractive or destructive activities allowed within them, and for that reason likely have good biodiversity benefits as well. So what this lets us say is that an MPA can be protected when environmentally damaging activities don't occur. And of course, with the definition of MPAs, that's a strong goal to think about with any given area. So I'm going to give a little preview and then we'll talk about an example. But one of the ways to kind of determine this is to look at the different types of activities happening. And the MPA guide shares this decision tree that has 7 different general types of activities that may or may not occur in a given MPA. And then this helps you kind of select down to one of those 4 levels of protection, which can help identify things to both celebrate and strengthen potentially about MPAs or any zone within an MPA as well. And then the third aspect of the MPA guide is the enabling conditions. And with our colleagues and social science leads on the MPA guide, this becomes a really crucial part because we know that all the different processes that go into creating and sustaining an MPA are really vital for its success. And these occur across all the different stages. So for example, co-creation with Indigenous peoples, local communities, other rights holders and stakeholders, decision-making that's inclusive, equitable, and evidence-based, long-term support, whether it be political or financial, or specifically for monitoring, so it can help to support adaptive management. And these words that I think we're talking about and embodying more and more in conservation, collaboration, always, transparency, communication, accountability, all these really go into the community that surrounds an MPA and helps it to be successful. So all of these aspects are just as crucial as accounting for the stage and level as well. And then, of course, these tie into the outcomes. You wouldn't have outcomes without being able to know if an MPA is active and what's happening there. So we know from decades of research, but also traditional knowledge, experiences that we all probably have in some form in our own ocean spaces, that outcomes can happen from MPAs that are strong and have support. For example, a range of different ecological outcomes, anything from the biodiversity conservation we aim for, but also fisheries yields for the spillover that Yannicka was talking about, water quality, protecting carbon stores by making sure the sediment isn't brought up and remineralized, but instead preserved without bottom trawling, climate resilience, and then importantly, very specific benefits for communities as well. If they're involved and the enabling conditions are in place, they are an opportunity to protect culturally important species and places and perspectives, as well as catches and income and empowerment and engagement and leadership and self-determination of stakeholders and rights holders. So we want all those things. And when they're more than words on a bulleted slide, we see it like this. In effect, in the past, the ocean was one big MPA because it was so difficult to travel large areas and to exploit heavily. But over time, we know that's not what we're dealing with today because no part of the ocean is unaffected by human impact. So if that's the case, what happens in the future can really hinge on this idea of different levels of protection. Fully and highly protected areas are more likely to have thriving communities that then underwater that support communities above water. So sometimes we think about it in this kind of simplified way that really anywhere in the world, an MPA or a zone with an MPA would fit in any of these boxes where we have our levels of protection on the left, up and down, stages of establishment along the bottom. And we see that as we go between these different ones, any MPA kind of has these attributes. And really what we're talking about is as we move towards the upper right, when sites are implemented and actively managed and fully and highly protected, these are the areas that we expect to have kind of the greatest benefits if biodiversity conservation is what we're aiming for. So the MPA guide can be used in many different ways, and it's been very interesting as we've been seeing how it's been used since 2021 when it was first released. There are uses that range from tracking MPA effectiveness, for example, for a single MPA in a country and so on, to evaluate existing MPAs, but also help to plan new and effective MPAs. It can help compare MPAs across different areas because there's many different ways that a country or a community may design to look at their MPA and see what's happening there. But it's nice also to be able to have a flexible approach globally. It can allow us to kind of compare. And really the goal is to be able to provide a common language about MPAs and to improve existing MPAs, create new ones, as I said, if that's what's needed to really meet our global goals. So I want to share an example with you because it's been really inspiring to have this consortium and growing network of folks apply the MPA guide around the world. And one place where this has happened is with the Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument in the US. This was expanded in 2016. And kind of an incredible process to see how state, federal government, and also Native Hawaiian leadership joined together to conserve a culturally and ecologically important part of the ocean and a rather large one to date. So essentially, when you look at the different aspects of Papahanaumokuakea, because there is a management plan in place, because there are resources shared to monitor these areas, and also because the Native Hawaiian leadership and the Office of Hawaiian Affairs is integrally involved in this to make sure that cultural needs are appropriately addressed and included in the management of this area, we would call it actively managed. Then when we look at the different types of activities happening there, so now we're thinking about level of protection and this decision tree, looking across, and this one kind of flows from more highly impactful activities like mining, mineral, oil and gas extraction, or prospecting. They don't include there. So no dredging and dumping, no anchoring, no infrastructure allowed, no aquaculture occurring currently, and no fishing, except for some non-extractive cultural activities that are happening, but they're infrequent. So traditional use is in alignment. It's allowed by permit, and it's fairly low impact. So this area would show up as highly protected for those reasons. No highly environmentally damaging activities or extractive activities are occurring there. Now, I just want to provide a little sneak peek behind the scenes because, of course, answering yes, no, or if it's high or low impact has some expanded guidance behind it. So behind each of these activities is kind of a color-coded table based on research and evidence that looks at different types of kind of sub-activities, in this case within fishing, where you see a range from small-scale selective gear with low input, starting to get to gear with more moderate impact, and then gear that has a large impact, as well as those you see in the gray, which are really gear it's so highly impactful that it's likely to be incompatible with the conservation of nature. So this kind of helps to get a sense, no extensive monitoring data needed, kind of a first pass at being able to know whether an area is likely to deliver the conservation benefits that we've all been talking about and working towards. So I also want to share an example from the US of kind of, instead of a single MPA approach, looking across a range of different MPAs, in this case, in a particular country in the US where I sit. So this is a paper published by Jenna Sullivan-Stack and I and others in 2022, and we looked at the 50 largest MPAs in the US. In our context, that equals 99.7% of the US area in MPAs. And we looked at stage of establishment and level of protection to try and get at some of these questions we were asking about what the US has and what's effective. And really, we had a special lens towards this because the US has an initiative called America the Beautiful, which sets our national target at 30% of the ocean protected and conserved by 2030. And what we really saw is that quantity, the movement towards a percentage, is certainly important, but quality is also very important as well. So here's an example of the data that we drew from that. So looking across those stages and levels for those 50 largest MPAs, what you're seeing here are 6 different regions. And the darker blue color is the total marine area in that region. So you see the Pacific by area has the greatest both area and percent of marine estate. And then what you see is the percent of the total area in MPAs. So that's the orange thing that you're seeing there. And what we see is so that's down at the bottom in the percentages. And what we see is that some areas have quite a lot, at least relatively, quite a lot of area in MPAs like the Pacific, and others, even though there's a large area, very small MPA representation there. And so it opens the conversation about representation, and the different habitats that may exist in these areas, and how useful it might be to think about protecting or strengthening what's there. And then also kind of just the balance. You know, we talked as an author group and with other colleagues about kind of the shared responsibility of conserving our ecosystems and how that's distributed and should be equitably and fairly distributed across regions. And then here, what that's doing is breaking down that total area into the area that's fully, highly, lightly, and minimally protected. So you have fully in blue, highly in purple, lightly in green, and minimally in yellow. And what we see here is some areas are all MPAs are either fully or highly protected. So we see that in the Pacific, just a very, very small percentage that's minimally, but incredibly impressive when you think about those biodiversity benefits like we've been talking about. Some others have kind of a varied portfolio of levels of protection, and some, like our northwest part of the US, only actually have minimally protected areas, and at that, a pretty small percentage. So when we're looking towards our 30% goal in the US, right now, 26% of our global waters are in MPAs. And the majority of that is highly or fully protected, largely because of those areas in the Pacific, like Papahanaumokuakea, incidentally. But the percent of the total marine area in the MPAs, in MPA waters of the continental US is only 1.9%. So it's helpful to think about our collective goals and the conversations that might need to happen around that if we really want to get towards ocean conservation and support for human communities as well. Now, so the MPA guide has been growing in use. These are some of the countries, regions, 100 largest MPAs that have been assessed using the MPA guide with a global network of collaborators in government, in academia, in local communities, practitioners, MPA managers. And at present, 92% of the global area in MPAs has been evaluated by stage and level. So in the fall, with the Protected Planet report that's coming from UNEP and the World Conservation Monitoring Center, we'll be sharing those data. And really the goal is to think globally about where we are. We're thinking about the 30%, yes, but also how much of that is truly effective and getting us towards the goals that we're really wanting to achieve. So the MPA guide has a user manual that's available online to provide case studies like this, kind of step-by-step approach to using this tool. And it also talks about how the tool intersects with other tools that you might use as well. For example, IUCN is a partner in this, and IUCN also has the Green List. Marine Conservation Institute has the Blue Parks program. And these are programs where you would take a deeper dive into the extensive data that may be available for a site to look at some of these outcomes. And that can be coupled with the MPA guide so that sites can be kind of compared over time, and sites that are more or less likely to achieve biodiversity conservation at strong levels, could be evaluated as such. So our goal for the MPA guide is to provide a clear understanding of how to establish MPAs. We want them to be effective for biodiversity and community outcomes. And we want to be able to help with a global conversation about how MPAs are doing and really to celebrate the successes. So much investment goes into MPAs around the world. A lot of sweat, a lot of passion, a lot of personal time and love. And so we want to be able to celebrate that and look and see how the successes have occurred. And we also want to be able to strengthen MPAs if that's what we need. If we have MPAs that are minimally protected, for example, because they allow bottom trawling, let's have a conversation about if that is truly aligned with what we're hoping for and how we might move forward. And then if new MPAs are needed, how do we move forward together collectively with an idea about the activities that are supportive of biodiversity and also supportive of people? So this is what we're working towards, to be able to enjoy these ocean spaces, to sustain them, to, in effect, sustain our humanity and our relationship with the ocean, And so thanks for the opportunity to share this with you today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Happy MPA Day. And I wanted to share a few resources with you also if you want to learn more about the MPA guide. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Kirsten. That was a really great overview of the MPA guide and such a valuable resource for sure for the whole world really to use. And I might segue into a question based on that. It's great to see a lot of examples already of where people have used it. Do you have a strategy on how to increase the uptake both regionally and globally at the moment?
Yes, thank you for that. I'm glad to kick off with that question. Yes, our approach has kind of been driven by authors, collaborators, creators of the guide, and colleagues around the world. So we've been working kind of from country to country where a situation arises. It looks like it could be useful to know the status of MPAs and to compare with other areas. So that's been our approach. But really, we're just reaching out there's many of us now, many more than just me, reaching out to ask others how it might be useful and to share it as a resource.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to go into some questions for Judy. What do you envision the future of MPA Day to be? Where would you like to see it in 5 years' time?
Thank you for that question. I think that, so when we started, it was South African, and I think we always had a dream that it would become an international day, but that was really a distant dream. And now that is actually what's happening. It is becoming an international day of celebration. So in 5 years' time, what I would love to see is around the world celebrations where communities and people working in and around MPAs come together to celebrate, to learn about, and to work out how to work more closely together to make these MPAs work. We've had wonderful presentations today from Yannicka and from Kirsten, and they've both just shown us how important marine protected areas are. But there is still a lot of resistance to marine protected areas around the world, and I think we need to recognize that. So if MPA Day can help bring together communities and celebrations around these oceans of hope, love that term, and if we can put the community's needs, the nature's needs together, and MPA Day can help to ensure that these special places in the ocean truly are supported because people understand their value, then I think we've succeeded what we set out to achieve in MPA Day. And what I would love is for it to grow organically with people with passion. And I think that that's what we're seeing already. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Also looking forward to seeing how it grows in the next 4 to 5 years. And please keep the questions coming in the Q&A. So if you have questions to Judy, Yannicka, or Kirsten, so please put those in the Q&A. Yannicka, I'd like to ask you, what does the future of protection look like in the Baltic Sea?
Well, that's kind of what we're trying to affect in the Protect Baltic project. So right now, the situation in the Baltic Sea is that we have about 16 to 17% of protected area when you compare like protected areas to the entire sea area. But it took us almost 30 years to get to that percentage. And now we would need to essentially almost double that by 2030. So there's a lot of work going into marine protected areas right now in the Baltic Sea. But as Kirsten also mentioned, we kind of have an opportunity now, even a once in a lifetime opportunity to make sure that we don't just reach a target, because the end goal should not be 30%. The end goal should be that MPAs actually provide the biodiversity benefits that MPAs have the potential to provide us if they are implemented properly. So what I'm envisioning for MPAs in the Baltic is that with the help of the Protect Baltic project, we could move in that direction, that by the time we hit 30%, it's not just about 30%, it's about a network of MPAs that actually is fully functional. It sees each individual MPA as part, as a puzzle piece in a bigger picture where each of the MPAs actually support each other. And that when we take decisions on where to put new MPAs to reach 30%, we do that in a strategic way, one that looks at or from the perspective of the ecosystem rather than, for example, where our human borders are. So when countries decide to establish new MPAs, they look at how does this MPA relate to the MPAs within our waters, but also in the neighboring countries' waters. This is a small sea and everything is interconnected. So if we don't do this, we kind of lose a great opportunity to really make sure that MPAs are effective. But in order to do this, and to be strategic and figure out where do we need to put our MPAs, what is it that we want to protect, where do we find these species or habitats, and so on. We need a lot of work to go in to underpin these decisions. So I'm hoping that through the work that we're doing now for the next 5 years here, we will be able to provide this type of information to the decision makers. Like, what is it that we're trying to protect? And this is something you need to decide together with the countries and the decision makers, because there is a policy aspect into this, but also provide data on where can we find it, do some modeling, get like proper like data-driven decision making in place when we take decisions on marine protected areas. And then also to, once an area is established, to ensure that we can provide good management, because as Kirsten's presentation also showed, like areas that don't have management or don't have measures, essentially paper parks, are not very effective at providing these biodiversity benefits that we're really hoping to get out of MPAs. I mean, that's why we put them in place and put all the effort into identifying them and so on. So, so what we're also trying to improve is the quality of the MPAs over time, not just where do we put them and how big should they be and what should they cover, but how do we make sure that we optimize them over time through management, and that management is actually adaptive, that we have monitoring in place so that we can follow up and see, is it working, is it not working? If it's not working, what could we do? And to also have capacity building for the people that work with these MPAs, to give them the tools and the help that they need to really be able to kind of like bring the MPA all the way to its full potential. So this is what I'm hoping we can achieve, or at least lay the groundwork for within the next 4 to 5 years, and the work that we're doing together with the countries and the authorities and the scientists right now in the Baltic Sea region. Because if we could really move from this kind of islands of hope perspective to a network of hope, if you will, where we can have like take an ecologically relevant perspective for the protection that we do, I think that could really turn the tide and enable MPAs to really provide their full potential. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. It's a very ambitious project, very excited to be part of it. If we pull this off, we're all going to be extremely excited by the end of this project. So it's really, yeah, it's a really cool way to go about it. Next question would be to Kirsten. In your opinion, what do you usually consider to be a hindrance in the creation and establishment of MPA? So which phase, where does it kind of get stuck often, and what can be done about that?
Thank you so much for that. And may I say first, thank you to HELCOM. HELCOM is such a global leader in what Janneke just shared in terms of being able to work across countries in collaboration, and may all our regions be so forward thinking. So as you say, Janneke, thank you for the time capsule that HELCOM is providing. So right to the question about where do some of those pitfalls occur? And part of the reason that the MPA guide evolved is that idea of stage of establishment. Like Annika was just saying, using the term paper parks, right? UNEP with the global data that's used to track progress towards the 30%, by mandate, they are the UN, right? They accept and collate the data. But, they take whatever countries have given, and also they don't necessarily have the standpoint to be able to look at each and say, oh, is this actually active in the water? Is it not? And so it's an easy way to identify whether areas are in fact truly active or not, because really that movement from designated to implemented is a stage and a transition that involves a lot of capacity and resources and sharing of momentum. And there can be lots of reasons why a site stalls there. For example, it may be that there was a lot of political will for a site, and then the administration and the government changed, and now the site finds itself in a very different context. So our perspective is that being able to share by saying, this site is at just designated, not implemented, or this site has been in proposed committed for quite a long time without moving forward. It can be an opportunity to identify places for resource sharing so that truly we as a global, but especially a regional to local community can help support areas. There are resources there in any context, and being able to share them within and without is super important for MPAs to be able to succeed. And then the other thing I would say is that as a conservation community, our history was very focused on the ecological side of things. And in some cases, the work with communities, the co-management, the co-creation may not have always been part of the mindset. And I've really seen that change so much in the last 5 to 10 years globally. I think it's a really inspiring time because it's a win-win. Not only does it help support the efficacy, we could use the term enforcement or compliance, but also local communities, Indigenous peoples, those who are on the waters and in the waters daily, know what best has happened in an area and what might be good paths forward. So it really helps to improve the management as well. So I think we're in a really exciting time where we're not separating those things so much. We're looking at them holistically and understanding that people are as integral to biodiversity as people are a part of biodiversity.
Great, thank you so much. We actually have two questions that very much lead on to what you've just said. One is about developing countries and how developed countries often have the resources to get to the 30 by 30 targets, and how can we increase MPAs in the global south, for example, when they have limited resources to do so. What is your opinion on that?
Well, maybe I can weigh in, and then the other panelists, Yannicka and Judy, too, I'd be really keen to hear. I think, well, first of all, it calls to mind the big ocean nations who are really leading the way in terms of protecting waters. I'm thinking of Niue and other countries that have more ocean space than land space, and are stewarding it in really inspiring ways by approaching it from their entire ocean kind of management. And so in that sense, I think many contexts in the global south are leading the way, and that example should be inspiring to those of us not there in the global south. I think also, though, the idea of sharing resources is a really important one, especially for global responsibility and accountability, because a lot of the things that are degrading and destroying biodiversity are based on the appetites and the exploitation of areas outside of those waters. And we need to take a strong look at fishing quotas and other things that are continuing to sustain that appetite that is affecting those areas outside of their own control, or the desire to protect their waters. So I would leave it there, but I think it's a really challenging one, and we as a global community need to support each other with evidence and case studies to be able to shed light and share resources.
Absolutely. Judy, do you perhaps want to weigh in on this question, being in the Global South?
Thank you. I can only talk from our experience in South Africa, and the chase for the 30 by 30 target can sometimes be good, but it can also be a little bit of a negative in that large spaces of ocean are sort of simply designated as MPAs, but there's no real implementation, there's no management. So that concept of a paper park is very real. And I think that what we need to be looking at is marine protected areas that actually are protected, which is so important. Allowing industrial trawling in a marine protected area, as we heard with the guide, that's not really protection. And from a South African point of view, we're looking at marine protected areas. Obviously, we're looking at the levels of protection in them. So all of our marine protected areas are zoned for various activities, some of which may be extractive, some of them are not extractive at all. And then also looking at other effective conservation measures. So marine protected areas are certainly critical and vital, but there are also other ways that we can protect ocean space and biodiversity. And we're looking at those as well. And really, I think the critical point is bringing communities in. So bringing local coastal communities into all of our discussions on marine protected areas and really helping them to tell the stories of how marine protected areas can support them as well. So it's not about just the biodiversity. We're always talking in MPA Day now about marine protected areas for nature and for people. So it's really building support with communities. And I think Kirsten spoke about that. And that's really how we're going to build our marine protected area network that is biologically diverse and representative, but that is also supported by communities. And that's the only way I think we'll be able to move forward. So it's building support for MPAs from community level up. And then I see a question about local government down too. So there needs to be a meeting. So it's bringing government's involvement, it's bringing communities, it's bringing the scientists all together to form a triangle of hope, which will help to support these protected areas into the future. But I think in the global south, it really is about support with communities, working together with communities, but having strong science to back it. People say, how do you know how many fish are in the ocean? We need scientists to explain. How do we know how many fish are in the ocean? The fishermen often can tell. They can see what's been happening and they can see the benefits of MPAs. So bringing that all together. So it's not going to be easy. And I don't think we should just chase a target. I think we should chase real protection. And I think that that's what's important. And that's where the MPA guide has been so revealing for us, because we think of protected areas as spaces where people can do only certain things. We hear about MPAs in the global north where you're allowed to do a trawling, and we're going, that's not a protected area. So it's been interesting to see just how different countries perceive protection.
Absolutely. Thank you, Judy. And it does also, there's another question about Indigenous people and how, and I know Kirsten has already mentioned co-creation and collaboration, but how do we address kind of the historical context of Indigenous people who were often excluded and exploited and weren't necessarily able to use the resources that had always been available to them in their kind of area, and how do we heal that kind of historical context? Because often I think there's a lot of weariness working with government and kind of officials, and how do we really bring them together and co-create the process? Are there any, I know that perhaps one of you have an example already, Kirsten, where that's actually worked really well, and it would be interesting to hear how that has gone.
Thank you very much for that, and acknowledging my own positionality, not as an Indigenous person, or the importance of the rights holders in leading those conversations and self-determining. You know, it's been very interesting to reflect on, first of all, the IPBES report that came out a few years ago about the state of biodiversity globally, and to see the collected information there about Indigenous traditional territories and how across the board, these are some of the best conserved areas in the world. That's a very telling perspective in terms of who's managing resources and who should be bringing management practices, including in these areas that have been generations to millennia in practice by these communities. And then I think also of the global biodiversity framework that I spoke about. And, Target 3 is the one that is about protecting and conserving 30% of the ocean, yes, and land and fresh water. And of the full 23 targets in that global biodiversity framework, interwoven among them is the primacy of human rights and considering traditional knowledge and Indigenous and traditional territories. So for this, we have a global framework. It's an international policy instrument. Most countries, not my own, sadly, and acknowledged, are signatories to that convention. We have a responsibility to follow those and to meet the targets with that in mind. And so I look to the leadership of our Indigenous colleagues in determining would those ITTs be opting in for protected areas. Like, for example, in the Indigenous protected areas of Australia, might some communities opt in for OECMs, as Judy was pointing out about those other conserved areas that are so important. ITTs should stand alone as these effective and conserved areas. So it's a really crucial conversation, and it's happening at multiple levels. And I think we as a community should stay tuned and stay involved and in partnership where we can.
Thank you very much. That was a good answer. Thank you. Jannica, I think this might be maybe towards you. If the boundaries of MPAs are adjusted based on shifts in habitats and species and climate zones, how quickly can these changes be implemented through national plans and enforced politically? How feasible is this approach? And it kind of fits into Protect Baltic, so I'm going to throw this one at you and see.
Well, how feasible it is of course up to each country's national legislation. So it's very difficult to give a general answer to this one. I can say that in the project that we're doing here in the Baltic, we're also looking at the legislative opportunities or barriers that the different countries in this region have, because of course legislation in many ways was a driver for protection in the beginning, but because legislation changes slower than our needs from an ecological perspective, they can also, over time, what started out being a benefit can become a barrier. So that's what we're doing in this analysis, is trying to look at are there differences in the legislation in different countries? We have a total of 9 countries around the Baltic Sea. In these 9 countries that are actually preventing the countries from working more closely together and creating this kind of joint network. And this can be one of these things, because many countries don't even really have legislation that defines how do you change or like remove an MPA. They have legislation that tells how do you put it in place, but not what do you do if it's no longer relevant, or if you would need to change the borders over time, for example, as a result of climate change, which is highly relevant here because we can already see shifts in species distribution as a result of changing water temperatures and salinity here in this region that has a really strong gradient already to start with. So these are all things that we will be looking at, but we can't, like, I can't provide a general answer on how feasible this is. Hopefully, with time, when the changes become more apparent, the authorities and policymakers will also see that there is a need to address this, and that will make it more feasible. But getting there, especially in international policy processes, can be a rather slow process. So I can't provide a direct answer, but I can say that it's something that we have also been thinking about, and that we're hoping we can provide, like, at least a starting point for through the work that we're going to do here. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next question is about the High Seas Treaty. That's obviously been a big news item this year, and which will hopefully come into effect next year, latest, we hope. And what do you consider the challenges are that governments will have to overcome to create MPAs in the high seas where nobody owns the ocean? I don't know who wants to take this one.
Shall I go? And then I'll pass it. I see
You go. Thank you.
Reaching. Yeah, I think, it's very interesting in the process when, the different collaborators who have been applying the MPA guide around the world. MPAs have challenges. Some of them are allowing in the regulations highly destructive activities to occur. So I think about the High Seas Treaty as, a really crucial moment to address these kind of things ahead of the game so that we have some kind of global agreement on activities that wouldn't be compatible with biodiversity conservation, and at least to start there. I think the treaty provides that place for conversation and agreement. There are some real challenges with the governance structure, which is not my area of expertise, but learning from colleagues just how the high seas has been used, and many are lobbying for it to continue to be used. I think we need to share the evidence globally that highly destructive activities like mining and dredging and drilling and exploration for these things are not compatible with biodiversity. There is evidence that can be brought to bear that it damages communities, some of them thousands of years old, that would not recover. And so I think that needs to be brought to the table. And then I think also with other conserved areas, which of course are part of this conversation, and those count towards target 3, this 30% by 2030 as well, we should also be carefully considering the same kind of lens. If fisheries areas that are managed by the RFMOs, regional fisheries management organizations, are brought for consideration, that we be thinking of that. What other sectors might be active in these places? Are there any of these damaging and incompatible activities taking place? I would love to see some of that as part of the treaty and part of the process moving forward.
Thank you very much. Do Yannicka or Judy want to add to that?
Yes. I'll give it it's a very, very good question, and I think it calls to mind so the ocean decade we're currently in the ocean decade, and the ocean decade has 10 working groups, and each of these working groups is looking at a different aspect of how we can get the science we need for the ocean we want in the future. And the working group that I've been involved in, working group 10, is looking at really kind of inspiring ocean care, for lack of a better word. It's building and reigniting a passion for the ocean amongst the whole world, which is a pretty broad sort of view and a very ambitious target. But it talks to the kind of complex interconnectedness in the ocean space, and the high seas probably exemplifies this, because it's been an area that's been almost out of sight and out of mind for most people, except for those that are gaining economic benefit from it. So how do we put together community and people needs put together this very complex economic driver, a very difficult governance framework, and then the biodiversity and the ecosystems that we know we need to protect for the future of people on Earth. So it's a very complex space, the high seas. And as Kirsten said, the deep sea mining and then obviously other extractive uses are all looming and current threats. And it's how do we put all of this together? And from my side, how do we communicate something that is so complex to people in a way that's easy for them to understand? Because in the past, we always thought that there were just so many fish in the sea, we could just keep fishing forever. There would never be an end. So the ocean was so vast, how could we ever impact it? And now, as Jane Lubchenco says, the ocean is now so important, we've just got to do something about it. We can't afford to let it die. We've got to look after it. So it's a very complex question, and I think that there are many people grappling with it. And my kind of call would be, let's talk about it. So the first step is really things like this webinar. Let's talk about it. Let's help more and more people to understand the challenges of the high sea, and then looking at what can we do from a political point of view in our own governments. What can we do with local communities? How can we influence fisheries? How can we influence mining companies? So how do we use our influence? As Sylvia Earle says, each of us has got a superpower. Let's find that superpower and use it. None of us can do everything, but each of us can do something.
Thank you so much, Judy. Jannica?
I think, okay, so in the Baltic, we don't have any areas beyond national jurisdiction. So we work with the concept of BBNJ, but it's not like directly related to the concrete work that we do. But one of the problems that we have historically had with areas beyond jurisdiction is this idea that nobody owns them. So essentially, this has resulted in what Judy also and Kirsten talked about, which is this is to be referred to as the tragedy of the commons, that if nobody owns it, then everyone can take whatever they want. But what we really need is a change in mindset to what the commons actually used to mean, because the commons didn't mean that nobody owns it. It means that everybody owns it. So if somebody wants to do extractive activities in the high seas, we need to move away from this idea that they can do it because it doesn't belong to everyone, to the point of it belongs to everyone. So if somebody wants to use it, they need to make sure that it doesn't negatively impact anyone, because we are all owners of this area. And of course, this is very difficult to do, but it is a concept that we would need to introduce more strongly in these discussions, to move away from a lot of the kind of rhetoric that is being used around the areas beyond national jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to move on to a different topic of discussion altogether, which is protection categories. And I think that's pretty much the Wild West of protecting marine protected areas, only because regions have different definitions as to what protection means and what strictly protected means and highly protected. And so I guess the first question would be, what is the current percentage of highly protected MPAs in the world? And a follow-up on that is, do we need a regional, at least a regional, maybe for certain regions, but a global threshold to know when an MPA is effective? So I guess from a protection level and strictly protected, do we need a global consensus as to what that actually means? And this is for anyone, I guess, but Jannica, you are unmuted.
My answer is yes. I think this would be very helpful. Of course, in different regions of the world, this might mean slightly different things, and we have to be sensitive to that as well. But the truth is, there are already categories available that have been globally agreed, for example, under IUCN. Then the problem has been introduced when the interpretation of these categories actually come into play, because you can't write out a definition for every possible scenario. And this has resulted in more and more definitions and interpretations becoming available. So of course it would be easiest if we had one that would be global, although there already is one. So maybe what we need to do is take the global one and then agree at an ecologically relevant level. How do we interpret this so that it doesn't go against what the global definition is, but maybe we can be more specific? So for example, when you look at what is strict protection, don't kind of move, don't weaken what is already globally agreed, but maybe work together with the countries or like municipalities or whatever what is ecologically at an ecologically relevant level where you are, to figure out how do we jointly interpret this so that everyone is on the same kind of same starting line or starting point when it comes to how do we classify. Because when even for simple things like doing calculations, I know there was somebody had a question about like how much of the ocean is strictly protected. If we all interpret what strictly protected is differently, then it becomes problematic when we actually put forward a number for this. But in the end, the number is less important than what actually happens in the area. And if we can agree on what needs to happen in the area for it to be strictly protected, then I think that would really help push the agenda and the actual measures in the MPAs forward. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Kirsten, do you want to add?
Yeah, thank you. I could not agree more. And now I think three of us have said, keep the target in mind, but don't be driven by a number towards the 30%, you know, be driven by the quality. I can say that from the work, well, first on the protected area categories of IUCN, I would underscore what Yannicka said. Those are a very important resource, especially when applied to MPAs, to think about kind of the management objective of an area. That tends to be the focus of the IUCN categories and is very important for kind of understanding why an area might exist and what the goals are. The MPA guide stage and level are meant to be complementary to that, in that that kind of takes it to what could the expected outcomes be based on whether it's active in the water and whether there aren't any environmentally damaging activities. And from the work that we've done with that idea of fully, highly as defined by the MPA guide, about 2.9% of the ocean would fall into those. And as of now, well, tomorrow morning, it's August data for the protected planet will roll out tomorrow, but that information will show it's a little over 8% of the total ocean is in any type of MPA. So I think it's a really helpful conversation for all of us to be having about, you know, it's not just a single number. Let's talk about what's therein and really work towards agreement. Is strictly this, is it that? And then that will help us as those who are kind of going through and thinking about applying these tools to help know how it can be useful.
Thank you. Judy, go ahead.
I think that Yannicka and Kirsten have really explained how important understanding a common language is across the marine protected area world. And within the MPA community, there is confusion. Imagine how much more confusion there is with the wider public, who are still trying to work out an MP what, So I think that it's important for the scientific community to get on the same page and to discuss the nuances. But then when we communicate more widely, we need to have sort of one voice and one understanding, a general understanding of what is highly protected and what is not protected, and that understanding that there are gray levels in between. And I think that Kirsten's numbers are really important. If we think that 2.9% of the ocean is fully or highly protected, that's quite a shocking fact. And I think that people can understand if we talk 2.9% of the ocean is fully or highly protected. I think that often a misconception is that a marine protected area means that nothing happens in the area. When we asked our visitors at the aquarium to describe a marine protected area, the most common word that came up was no. No fishing, no diving, no walking, no shell collecting, etc. So in the past, we've really communicated about marine protected areas in a very negative way. We've used to say it's a place where you can't do anything. And we almost need to change that around and look at what you can do in a marine protected area, the non-extractive activities, the ecotourism benefits of marine protected areas, etc., etc., the spillover, as Kirsten spoke about. So I think that it's changing our language around marine protected areas so that we really explain the benefits within our explanation. So we stop thinking about marine protected areas as places where you can't do stuff, but places where you can do non-extractive stuff. And that's to the wider community. Obviously, when we're talking to industry and governments, then we've got to be really, really clear about what we mean by protection and what fully or highly protected means, etc. So I think that it's ensuring that the way we're communicating about MPAs is appropriate for the audiences that we're talking to, which is something that is not always easy, we're realizing.
Absolutely. And I think involving communities is always a very important aspect of driving a process of getting an MPA established and it being managed properly. And that actually leads into a question that comes from Elise from the UK, who says that they have a high percentage of MPAs in the UK, 38% in fact, but that these are not properly managed and enforced. And so they are still seeing a lot of environmental impacts happening in these MPAs. And so her question really is, does the panel have any examples of enforcement or movements in the respective countries that have increased enforcement within MPAs and actually helped the situation and making them better managed, essentially? Who would like to start? Kirsten, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question. You know, I might even walk it back a step as well, because I think oftentimes when we talk about MPAs perhaps not performing to goal, to standard, a lot of it is about enforcement. But even before we get there, right, many MPAs allow activities in their regulations. And I think that's a message that I found really surprising when we were going through our analyses. And I think when I'm talking about it around the dinner table with my family, my cousins, and also people are surprised about that. So I think just sharing that information is helpful, including, I'm thinking specifically of a recent circumstance where Greece did kind of an assessment of their MPAs using the MPA guide, and kind of it was a moment of realization that bottom trawling is happening within the MPAs. And so in April, the government of Greece announced that they will be phasing out bottom trawling in all their national MPAs by 2026, and then all of their MPAs by 2030. So that is a very a really inspirational and compelling step that government took, and they are on the path, right? Some of these things you don't snap your fingers and have it happen. There's a lot of reasons why those changes should be taken into effect over a little bit of time, but they've set that course. So I would first start there. And then I would say that on the engagement and kind of compliance side, I think in circumstances where you see coastal communities who have been involved, there's a lot of, in my experience, pride in the areas and desire to have them be successful. And so I think really having those conversations from the beginning, and if they haven't happened, creating a place for reconciliation around that and then forward movement together is really important. And I think it's possible. And we can really be thinking about it that way.
Thank you so much, Judy.
I think that Kirsten's answer is great in terms of that phasing out. If bottom trawling is allowed in an MPA, it's like a really first step. And in that respect, I feel like really proud of our South African marine protected areas, because although there is some extractive use allowed in the MPAs, so each of our MPAs has a very particular zonation, and different activities are allowed in different parts of the MPA. We don't have trawling and deep sea mining and things like that are not allowed in the MPAs. So those kind of big extractive things are not happening in our MPAs, but it's talking to the other forms of extractive use and how do we make sure that that is sustainable. And then I just want to do a segue into the importance of research and the importance of research to prove the efficacy of marine protected areas. And I think that we can only have that if we've got parts of the marine protected area that are fully or highly protected, because the research is showing more and more that it's those fully or highly marine protected areas that are really helping us to achieve those biodiversity targets. So the importance of research and communicating the research effectively, that I think is one of the things that we need to do as a coal community better and better, because often for people, seeing is believing. When they see the effect and the positive sides of MPAs, they go, okay, so this is not just a theory, this is not just another rule that's here to make our life difficult. It actually is benefiting us in the long term. And the more research that comes out like that we can communicate, I think the better the case will be for marine protected areas in the long term.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jannica?
Thank you. This goes back a little bit to one of the previous questions where we were talking about like the benefits or possible barriers that legislation can provide. This might differ in different parts of the world, of course, but in the Baltic and in Europe in general, a lot of MPAs are established for one or a few habitats or species. And so legally, the measures that you put in place can target only those species because that's why you have the area in place. And we are seeing now, like when you are asking, do we see a kind of a trend here or a change? We are seeing more interest, at least in the Baltic, from the ministries and the governments in this region to look beyond those individual species or habitats, to look at, okay, if we already have a protected area, what potential do we have to put more measures in place to ensure that that area provides more benefits? So if you have established it for one species, how can we get around that and look at it from a more kind of ecologically broad perspective to make sure that it doesn't just protect that one individual species, but rather it protects biodiversity as a whole, or it ensures ecological function, or it provides, we make sure that it provides ecosystem services that we are dependent on. But we are at the stage now where there's interest in this, but the kind of legislation is still lagging behind a bit, because of course, when you're talking about enforcement, you can only really enforce where you have the law at your back to support that enforcement. So now it is a question of kind of the legislation catching up to these like expanded, or they're not really new needs. We had these needs all the time, but we might not have been aware of them. So like legislation catching up to the realization that we need to look at protection more holistically rather than a few individual species or habitats. Look at the area as a whole. What does this area provide? Who lives here? What can we do to make sure that integrity is maintained? Thanks.
Thank you. And it actually leads to a question from someone in Denmark who is a sustainable fisheries researcher. And his question really is, how do you balance the social and economical and ecological sustainability when increasing strictly protected MPAs when it comes to fisheries specifically? Will the fisheries industry find it challenging? I would assume so, but what are the benefits of having these MPAs to the fishing industry?
I can maybe start here, as this is Denmark is in this part of the world. So in the Baltic Sea, we are right now in dire straits, if you will, when it comes to fishing, because several of our stocks have collapsed in the last couple of years. So we can see the direct consequences of not taking this holistic approach, because a lot of fisheries measures have been put in place like over the last 20 years to try to kind of maintain the stocks and so on. But fisheries is not the only pressure that these stocks are experiencing. So when you don't have a holistic perspective on what is actually influencing these stocks and how do these pressures interconnect, like what's the cumulative load or the cumulative impact that you can see on this species, then you end up in a situation where we are now, where even like the kind of most reliable stocks like herring and so on are now severely depleted. So the potential here for fisheries of strictly protected areas in this region especially is really high, because we're already in a situation where fisheries are not financially sustainable because there simply isn't enough fish to fish. And hopefully strict protection would result in these kind of spillover effects that we can see in other parts of the world for MPAs, where you get more biomass, so you get more fish overall, but the fish are also bigger, they're healthier, bigger fish spawn more. So you get like a more reliable input of like spawning biomass, if you will, to rely on for future fishing opportunities and so on. So there's a lot of potential here. But the problem is that this potential is long term. And of course, fishermen who are already struggling because of stock collapse to cover their costs within the next year or the next 5 years, of course, have a great conflict with the need to then lock certain areas where they might have fished in the past to enable this recovery. How do you kind of carry them over from where we are right now to where we hope to be, where these strictly protected areas would then kind of provide more biomass to fish? There is a tool that is used in the Baltic that looks at where the fishery actually takes place, where most of the fish actually are, and if there is a way to move some of the fisheries away from areas like which we might then protect, and into other smaller areas, but where the actual yield, so how much fish you can fish, wouldn't significantly change, because a lot of effort goes into fishing in areas where you might not actually catch that much fish. So if we could change this or use this tool to figure out how to minimize the economic impact on fisheries, then this would minimize the conflict between strict protection and fisheries and carry us through this kind of recovery period that we hope strictly protected areas would then provide us with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kirsten.
Yeah, I was just going to add that we are finding an interesting circumstance here in Oregon because we have a system of marine reserves, we call them, but they're fully protected areas along our coast. And there's extensive monitoring taking place in these areas. And what we've found is that it's a very interesting opportunity for synergy and data sharing with our fisheries and stock assessor colleagues, because, for example, a lot of the work we do is looking at the type, the species, and the ages of recruits, little juveniles that are coming into the MPA areas. And it turns out that those data are really valuable for like spawner recruit relationship ratios and things that the fisheries stock assessment models are built on. The more we know kind of what that first curve looks like, the better we're collectively able to develop fisheries models for setting accurate catch limits and so on. So it's kind of a cool thing to think about. One, there's benefits of just protecting certain stages of the fishery, life stages, but also there's an opportunity for data sharing that could also be a way to kind of leverage the value of these areas for supporting fisheries as well.
Thank you. Judy?
I think that Janica and Kristen have raised such important points. And wherever we've done research on fisheries and MPAs, we've seen the fisheries benefits. But I think, as Janica said, the benefits take time. It's taken us time to overfish many stocks. It's going to take us time to rebuild them. And what do we do in the interim? But I just want to maybe look at it from a slightly different angle. When we look at management and governance, we tend to have a fisheries department over here and we have a protection department over here. Whereas in actual fact, those two departments should be working so closely together, sharing data, sharing research, and really working together, because that's the way we're going to get the greatest benefits for the fishing industry as well as for protection. Because ultimately, we're not protecting the ocean just for protection's sake. If we can benefit the fisheries with the protection, it's an integral part of a marine protected area. So we want that biodiversity benefit, absolutely. But the joy of an MPA is it benefits fisheries as well. But we need to change the way we manage fisheries, and we need to bring in the protection as we're managing the fisheries. So those two departments shouldn't be in separate buildings. They should almost be on the same floor so that the communication and the links are together, because then we're going to really start seeing the benefits out for the fishermen and for the environment.
Absolutely, I fully agree with that. Now, I'm very aware of the time. We are in the last 9 minutes of our webinar. Thank you so much for all the questions. I'm going to take one more because I find it quite an interesting, very specific question, all the way from Taiwan. And the Shu has asked or has told us that the government in Taiwan claims that 8% of Taiwan's territorial sea is protected and is an MPA. However, after using the MPA guide, they have realized that only 0.1% is actually fully protected. And even though the government is now fully on board in increasing management effectiveness, Shu's question is really, how can a small country like Taiwan help increase MPA effectiveness? And so what would be the advice to a small island nation like them?
So,
yes.
Sorry, Janica, do you want to go?
I was just going to say that this is a little bit like the puzzle piece example I used from before. We don't all have to protect like 30% of the entire ocean. We just have to protect 30% of our own waters in a good way. Because if you do that, and everyone does that, we will protect 30% of the entire ocean. And so, like, if you can like start with doing 8% and do 8% well, so that the management is in place and you have the measures, and you, like, even if you don't go to strict protection, but that you get to a point where you can actually see the biodiversity benefits, this is already really a really good step. So it's not always about the square kilometers. Like it's about like providing your small piece of the puzzle to the bigger picture. And this is true for any country. We have countries in the Baltic that have a really, really long coastline, cover almost half of the Baltic, like Sweden. And then we have countries with really tiny coastline, like Latvia and Lithuania. But if both of these make sure that they protect 30% of their area in a strategic way, so let's say the right 30%, then we will get the biodiversity benefits on an ecologically relevant level, like on the level of the entire Baltic Sea. And the same is, of course, true for any area around the globe. Thanks.
Thanks, Jannica. I think that's a great way to kind of explain what can happen and what is happening already in the Baltic. My only suggestion would be to look at what the science says are the most important areas to protect. So from a biological point of view, are we protecting a network of ecosystems? Are we protecting a network of biodiversity? And then find the most important areas to protect, but then really start communicating now with different target audiences, with the fisheries, with the managers, with general communities. Start talking now before anything becomes a higher level of protection, so that people are brought along the journey with you. So involve communities along the way. Don't suddenly say at the end, we've identified these 15 areas that we're going to make now highly protected. Bring the communities with you. So start communicating now, using whichever tools are best suited to your particular environment.
Thank you. Kirsten, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. This is such a good inspirational question to end on too, because I think I agree that it's about starting the conversation and celebrating the 0.1% that is fully protected and looking to see what worked there, and both on the side of establishing it and then also in terms of what's happening there and what kind of effects are being seen on the biodiversity side and for the community side. So I'm excited that we're moving forward towards this so that we can really peel back the layers and celebrate what's been done well and find ways to strengthen what we already have. New areas will come, but I think starting with what we have and building from there is a really good starting point.
Thank you so much. And I think I'm going to try. Yes, Judy, please go ahead.
I just had to chime in there. So what Kirsten said is the theme of this year's Marine Protected Areas Day, which is celebrating the marine protected areas that work for nature and for people. So I think that was a lovely kind of segue into the rest of our celebration. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all of you on the panel, Kirsten and Jannica and Judy. It has been a really great 2 hours, and I'm very impressed that we still have lots of people in the webinar. So it obviously means that it's been a very valuable experience for them and that they wanted to stay until the end. So thank you all for attending. We will make this recording available, so anybody who has missed it or missed parts of it can definitely still watch it again. I wanted to just say it's clear that MPAs are very much contextual to their the place that they take place and what we want to protect, how much we want to protect. And so it's really been insightful to learn how to use the MPA guide to just get to the starting point, at least, of understanding what is going on in your area and then taking the next step. And yes, start small, don't chase numbers. I think that's also something we've learned today. And just to finish off, I hope that everyone who is in this webinar still, that you can join us later on for the various activities. The next one is happening in 1 hour's time. So 12 o'clock Central European time for the Twitter chats or X chats, whichever you want to call it. So we hope to see you online. And other than that, thank you so much for attending and see you around, and happy MPA Day. Thank you.